What's going on, y'all? This is Looking Ahead to Beto Days, and I'm your host, Chris. Today's episode, we will be discussing LGBTQ plus equality, something I admittedly didn't know a lot about before I did this episode. And as I flipped through Beto's policy plan and I went through my discussion with our guest, it's very enlightening, and a lot of the stuff that I would have thought were already done weren't, and I'll get into that a little bit when I get into the actual policy plan. But before we get on and move on to anything else, I'm going to go ahead and plug the next episode. Our next episode will center solely on the debates. I know I've been going into a lot of Beto's policy plans, but I have had a few requests about the debates. I've talked to one of the former guests, Dan Golden, who's actually going to come back on. Him and I are going to discuss the debates. We're going to discuss also the upcoming debate that's going to be on CNN. And we're just going to do this whole episode on that. Gives us a little break from the policy plans. And it also gives a little bit of insight from one debate moving into the other. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get into the Beto news. So the debates, I know I mentioned them briefly. We'll talk about them briefly again. The big event, or the big thing that happened that people kind of were discussing afterwards, pertains to, at least from the first night, pertains to an incident that occurred between Julian Castro, who's another Texas Democrat, and Beto. Basically, Beto was asked a question about his immigration policy. Julian Castro doesn't see it the same way Beto does. So instead of letting Beto put out his point, Castro just started talking over him and told him he didn't do his homework, which is super unfortunate because I'm 1,000% sure there's nobody that has done their homework better than Beto. That's not even being as somebody who's a supporter. That's just watching what the man does in general. He is constantly pushing immigration. It's a big deal. Like I said, we're going to talk about the debates in a full-on episode next week. So I don't want to ruin anything or spoil anything. So we're going to keep that moving on. And actually, we stay in the same vein of immigration. The day after the first debate, Beto went down to Homestead, Florida, where he went and visited one of the detention camps. There's actually video of him speaking there. He was holding up cardboard hearts so the kids could see him, and you could see that he was extremely moved by what he was seeing. It can't be easy, especially knowing the conditions that are down there. And going on in these camps, and that is why he took his weekend and spent it at detention facilities, again protesting. He went to Southwest Key facility in Texas. It's outside of Houston. And then the big one, he went to Clint, Texas. When Beto went to Clint, Texas, he organized as many people as he could to come down and protest the conditions. And he did this after having been to Ciudad Juarez. Ciudad Juarez is on the other side of the Rio Grande from El Paso, and Beto wanted to talk to the people who were being held in asylum camps that weren't allowed to come into country because of the Trump administration abusing our asylum laws. He spoke to a 19-year-old girl who her entire family was moved on through and had moved up to Los Angeles. However, she was kept there because she was 19 years old, and she's been there for 3 months. I think she was like number 7,000 on the list to be processed. That's the kind of ridiculous stuff that we're seeing the Trump administration do, and that's the kind of stuff and the kind of homework that Beto O'Rourke is doing. He's going and visiting these places because he's bringing attention to them. He got Tornillo shut down as an infamous camp where, again, there was abuses. There were children who had passed away there, and he took a group of people down there and they protested, and they finally shut it down. So he's done a lot of work on this, and that's going to bring us to our main topic of the day, and that's LGBTQ plus equality. Now, while immigration and LGBTQ plus equality might not seem like it goes hand in hand, he's actually brought them together because he does talk about LGBTQ plus asylum seekers and them being treated with dignity just like everybody else trying to seek asylum here. And I know I start all of our all of our discussions and talking about his plan off with a quote, and today will be no different. This is him speaking on. This is Beto speaking on the 3rd anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting, when he put out his actual LGBTQ plus equality plan. And so Beto is quoted as saying, "I want to make sure part of the way we commemorate those victims and acknowledge the hatred and the homophobia that still exists in this country is to take decisive action to protect the full rights of every single one of our fellow Americans." Now, as I dug into this, because as I'm a straight white male, I have to. It's sad that I have to do research into what it's like being others, but that's a thing, unfortunately, that I have to do. I didn't know a lot of this stuff was like actually in our law. Like, conversion therapy isn't federally banned, which blows my mind. That seems like such a basic right, human right. That, we don't torture people to make them not gay. It blew my mind. So I'm going to take us through his actual plan. And again, it is another 3-pronged plan. He wants to make sure every American has a right to live life safely, openly, and free from discrimination. Duh. That's how everybody in America wants to and should be able to live their lives. Your rights end when my rights begin. Period. So, number 1, he wants to use executive authority to ensure that the LGBTQ plus community is protected and treated equally under the law. Number 2, he wants to work with Congress to enact legislation to ensure LGBTQ plus Americans have full equality and opportunity regardless of where they live. And number 3, and this is big, I think it's one of the most telling part because it's on a much grander scale, and that is to work with allies to strengthen protections for the LGBTQ plus community globally. I believe there was a young man who was executed in Saudi Arabia. I believe he was beheaded because he was gay. So we need to strengthen here, but we need to bring the world along with us. So I can definitely get down with that for sure. So let's take and dig into part 1 first. Beto wants to reverse the Trump administration's discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community. He wants to overturn Trump's discriminatory, I promise I can read, transgender troop ban, including all resulting discharges. That is the most mind-boggling thing to me, and part of this, as far as things that have happened in the last few years. If you want to fight and die for me because I can't or I'm not willing to, I don't care what you do. I don't care who you are. You are a better person than I am, and are a much braver person than I am. This shouldn't even be a question. He also wants to overturn deploy or get out policy, which bans the practice, and ban the practice of discharging HIV plus service members. He wants to reverse Trump's efforts to block access to healthcare for LGBTQ plus people and enforce protections for LGBTQ plus individuals under the Affordable Care Act. I can't even begin to tell you. I just don't understand why these aren't like this even has to be said. It's mind-blowing. Invigorating the Presidential HIV/AIDS Advisory Council, reinstating Department of Education guidance and enforcement efforts designed to protect LGBTQ plus students in public schools. I actually work in a school that does a really good job with that. I have students who are and want to start an LGBTQ plus club next year, and from the sounds of it, the school's backing it pretty good. So while I can't attest to that, I'm like 1,000% sure that's probably huge problems in certain parts of America. He wants to begin enforcing the equal access rule. He wants to reverse Trump's efforts to allow federally funded adoption and foster care agencies to reject same-sex families, which again is mind-blowing to me. Like, if you want to raise a kid and you want to take that upon yourself as a father who's raising a 9-month-old, my 9-month-old is 9 months old today, more power to you. And honestly, these kids just want to be loved. If you're going to love that child, that's all that should matter. That should be the only question on the adoption worksheet or application is, are you going to love this child? It shouldn't matter who you love and who are going to raise that child. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. He wants to reverse the administration's attempt to expand religious exemptions in order to enable discrimination or harm others. People hide behind religion. This country has weaponized religion in an absolutely egregious way, and it is trying to take people out of our democracy, and that is not okay. He also wants to, and this is also really, really pertinent right now because we had 7 transgender women, 7 African American transgender women murdered in the last month, 2 of which were in Texas. He wants to protect transgender individuals, in particular transgender women of color, from violence. He's going to direct the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the crimes against transgender people. He's going to ensure law enforcement agencies receive training related to implicit bias, use of force, and accurately reporting the gender of victims. He wants to reinstate the Bureau of Prisons transgender offender manual to ensure safe housing for transgender people in BOP custody. And he wants to address the violence directed at transgender women of color in general. And we actually get into that a little bit with our guests, so I'm going to leave that to the later discussion. He wants to include LGBTQ plus individuals fleeing persecution as a vulnerable population for purposes of immigration enforcement. Like I said, there was a young man who was just murdered in Saudi Arabia. If you're being persecuted for for who you are, you should be able to come here to seek asylum, period. That's common sense. He wants to affirm that same-sex couples with one U.S. citizenship partner and one non-citizen partner are entitled to the same benefits of marriage regarding paths to residency and citizenship. And again, I mentioned this earlier, he wants to protect LGBTQ plus youth from conversion therapy. For those of you who don't know, certain people, Mike Pence, think that conversion therapy is a way to fix people, and you can't see my air quotes, but fix people who are gay. They've used shock therapy. They've put them in camps. It's all sorts of stuff. It is absolutely disgusting stuff. And I cannot believe it is not banned federally. It just is mind blowing. He wants to prioritize the research necessary to modernize the outdated blood donation requirements, including the current 1-year ban or bar for gay and bisexual donors. And he wants to create an interagency task force on LGBTQ plus non-discrimination. He also wants to ensure LGBTQ plus Americans are included in federal data collection efforts. He wants to, and this is going to take us into part 2, he wants to pass the Equality Act, which, again, mind-blowing. It's 2019. How are these things not done? He wants to ensure that LGBTQ plus people have equal access to health insurance and health care. I've already mentioned that. And I can't with all of this. He wants to reform our criminal justice system. He wants to embrace the recommendations of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. He wants to end the deprivation of healthcare and HIV treatment in prison. And he wants to reform the Prison Rape Act to prevent abuses in prisons. He also wants to enact the Every Child Deserves a Family Act, a bill barring discrimination against LGBTQ plus youth and taxpayer-funded foster care and adoption programs. And then there's part 3, and I know I've touched on this a couple of times thus far, but this is to help protect the LGBTQ plus community across the globe. It's going to improve the process of LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers. It'll work with allies to secure a global treaty through the International Law Commission, invest in the Global Equity Fund, and establish a special envoy for the human rights of LGBTQ plus people. We have members of the LGBTQ plus community all over the world who are being persecuted against and murdered, abused, attacked, sexually assaulted, and instead of being a leader in this, the United States has really gone backwards. I mean, we're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, but we're not protecting all of our own citizens. And if we do such things, the rest of the world will follow. We just have to be a leader in that aspect. And the U.S. can be a leader in all of that as long as we have a good leader, not somebody who is out for their own personal gain, who hobnobs with dictators and calls the press the enemy of the people. We need real leadership in America, and not a faux dictator. But that is going to carry us on into the next segment of the show. So this is where we will pick up with our guest. Today's discussion will focus on LGBTQ plus rights, and first and foremost, I'd like to introduce my guest, LaRon Dawkins.
Hi, I'm LaRon Dawkins. I currently live in the Hampton Roads area, Newport News, Virginia to be specific. I work for a IT company called Fusion PC, and I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Fantastic, and moreover, me and LaRon go way back, and I specifically chose him to talk about this topic, or at least come on as my guest, not because he's necessarily a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but because me and him have a close relationship. He's actually more close to family than he is anything else. But and going back early on in our relationship, he didn't come right out to me, and obviously that is, it's people in their own time, but there's actually a little bit of reasoning behind that. So LaRon, after we'd been friends, I think we'd been friends like a year and a half, you finally came out as a bisexual man.
Right.
What kind of took you so long?
Honestly, for me, you hit the nail on the head when you said it's a personal thing. For a long time, I had personal reservations of just opening up for my sexuality for basically anybody. And when because you and we first met, we started working together. And I'm not going to name the institution we worked at, but we worked there for a while, and then promotions and stuff happened, and I became your boss. And mainly, like I said, I don't typically disclose myself towards everybody. It's just one of those things, even though technically I feel like I'm an open book. But the major reason why is because when you tell people something about your sexuality and stuff like that, unless you have a really good read on them, you're not always going to know how they're going to react and stuff like that. And back in your day, Chris, you were kind of a bro, so all things considered, sometimes you just don't know how people take news of certain things. And also, I'm one of those people, I kind of conduct myself professionally, so it wasn't a situation where it would ever be something where a bad situation happens, or I wind up getting into a compromising situation with myself, with you, and things like that. So it took a while, and I want to say, wait, do you remember when I finally told you?
I mean, we became friends in 2008. You told me before 2010. And, I get a lot of the reservations, too. What I don't talk about a lot on this podcast is my upbringing. I grew up in an all-white conservative town where everybody had their opinions, and they were hammered in. And I have always been the black sheep of that town. I mean, I'm the black sheep of my family. You are who you are, and I don't care who you are, what you believe, who you love. I love people for being people, but at first glance, the town I was from, and LaRon having known that,
yeah,
it'd be real hard to come out to somebody, because it's a stigma, and it's a stereotype.
Yeah, and you're definitely right, because I did know that you had some really churchy folks.
some really churchy folks. For sure. And I remember when you first came out to me, when we were in the back room in the
oh god, do I just say it like that, in the back room?
For the company that we worked for, and I already knew, and you told me, and I was like, yeah, okay.
Wait, how'd you know? I'm curious now. How'd you know?
Full disclosure, Zodi had told me before we ever knew that, but I also kind of I mean, I know you as a person, dude. We spent so much time together. It never bothered me.
It kind of fell on you, basically.
Yeah, for somebody who's outside of the community, it's not my place to go up and ask. It was me waiting for you to be comfortable with who I am. I mean, with our friendship, to tell me. And when you told me, I just remember being like, yeah, okay. It does. Did you think we weren't going to be friends anymore? Because that's not what's going to happen.
Actually, that's a possibility, and that's what a lot of people face in this day and age. Especially if you look at our younger population, and I'm talking young kids, as old as 11 and 12 years old and stuff like that. They always feel like there's a possibility of alienation, and they feel like that because there is a history of being alienated from your friends, from your family, from your community, things like that, and it's funny that I finally know now that somebody outed me to you, because that's typically how it happens to me a lot. Like I have a big circle of friends. Well, I have different circles of friends, like various circles of friends and stuff like that. And so, and all those circles will intermingle with other circles out there and things like that. And eventually, word gets back around. Like, it usually like spills out in conversation. It's not even like this big scandal. It's more like yeah, it's so and so, and then LaRon this, and it's like, wait, LaRon what? He's who?
Yeah. See, but like for me, it's always like I've always loved you for who you are, right? And and it means a lot to me that you are so proud with who you are too. And to the point, like we were talking about kids, and sometimes it's hard. And they don't really know how to gauge it. Well, and I did see a little bit of that this year as a teacher. I teach sixth grade, and I've seen both sides of it. And I have a lot of students who are super proud. Like I had a lot of kids who are really into Pride Month, and I had a student who came to me and said, "Hey, we're starting the LGBTQ plus club next year." And my first comment was, "Well, who's your sponsor?" And she's like, "Well, I was thinking of somebody, but I was going to ask you as well." I said, "Done. I'll do it right away. Let's go. We can work on this together. Let's get this done."
You know what? That's amazing actually, because
I was so proud of that kid.
I'll put it like this.
I was super proud of her.
Yeah, I am too. Just hearing that story, I'll put it like this. I was born in. I'm about to give away my age. I was born in 1975. And in case my name didn't give you guys an indicator, I'm black. So in the black community, like there's already like this underlying tension about gay, bisexual, queer people, and particularly trans people and stuff like that. So, and my parents also have a very conservative. My parents were very conservative when I was growing up. And when I say conservative, I mean like they were also Republicans and stuff like that, but they were also like God-fearing people in the church and all that stuff. So do the math. Growing up, a product of the 70s, grew up in the 80s though, because I consider myself an 80s kid. Because I spent my time, like nurturing in the 80s, but looking at how things were back then, like you didn't just come out like as gay or bisexual or whatever unless you knew what you were doing and stuff like that, because people talked, people had reactions, people did things, and being the only black son in a family where it gets beat in your head, like, oh, you gotta be the man, you gotta have kids and all this stuff and all this stuff and things like that. I didn't know right away that I was bisexual. As a matter of fact, I by the time I got to right about like late middle school, right in the high school, I started realizing there was something not quite right about the way I feel about women.
I would disagree with that. There's definitely nothing wrong with the way that you feel. I understand where you were coming from at the time, but I want you to know, I'm sorry. I had to speak up for that one. As a teacher, I don't ever want you to think that something, and as a human being, I don't want you to ever think there's anything wrong.
I understand. I understand. It's more like when you're doing a checklist, a mental checklist of things that you're doing, things that you're going to become, and stuff like that. That's what I meant by when I said like something just didn't feel right or felt off. That's what I meant. Because I don't ever want people to believe that your sexuality is like some type of disease or some type of mental illness or things like that. You are who you are, and let's be honest. Like, if you're not actually living up to who you are, you're basically harming yourself at a level that's going to really affect you to the point where you won't be able to have interactions with people.
I agree with that. I think that you do a disservice to yourself by not living your truth and being who you are. And this is very interesting because LG with my kids now. Like I said, my students. I had a seventh grader who was very reserved with sexuality, but the sixth graders this year were very, very open, and it's been a really, really long road to hoe for the LGBTQ plus community. And I learned something this week that I didn't know. This is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Inn in the Stonewall riots. I had no idea what that was, and it's kind of funny how I figured it out. I'm a huge Yankees fan. and the New York Yankees actually put a memorial up in Monument Park
That's
to
right.
the Stonewall riots.
I remember seeing that on social media. They did that, and I was like, wow. And you know, it's just another way of like showing inclusion. I also saw some of the backlash, you know, because there are people out there who, you know, everybody has their opinions, but some people just aren't educated enough to understand why like an institution like the Yankees would do something like that.
No, the Yankees are awesome about stuff like that. They're super inclusive, and even on the airwaves, they said they want Yankee Stadium to be a place that everybody can come. But specifically speaking with Stonewall Inn, just to give you guys a little bit of some background, back in New York, they used to run raids on gay clubs. Like I said, I did all this research afterwards because I was like, oh man, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
They used to run raids on gay clubs. You couldn't hold hands, couldn't hug. So these clubs were kind of like places that people could go and really be themselves. But the Stonewall Inn was a little bit different because they allowed dancing. So on the night of like June 27th and 28th, the police came in and they raided this building. They had plants in there. The lights flicked off. The lights flicked on. Well, what happens is you have people you've got them raiding people on the inside, and then they're collecting and arresting people. And as this is happening, there's a crowd of people gathering outside, and that crowd grew before they could get the trucks to take the people who'd been arrested away, and so that kind of grew, and they were pushing back. And there was this lady, there's a girl who was saying, why aren't you guys doing anything, as the police are. I can hear you clicking.
Oh, sorry.
You're all right.
I thought I had that muted.
No, you're good. I'm sorry. I'm totally leaving that in, by the way, just so you know, because it's funny. Stop clicking. Anyways, so what happens is this, she says, why aren't you guys doing anything? And the crowd just starts pushing back, and it ends up being this kind of violent riot. But that moment is where the modern day LGBTQ movement came from, and I didn't know that. As a straight man who has lived in a conservative community his almost entire life until I got out of it. I didn't know those kind of things. It's fascinating. There's still so much room for me to learn as a person. I try to eat up and soak in as much as I can. So I definitely had to plug that and how big that is. Go Yankees. On multiple levels here, but let's get into a little bit of a line of questioning.
Right.
So as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, what's important that a candidate does for you, seeing that equality isn't something that exists 100% right now?
Honestly, I'm going to say the biggest thing is actual equality, but there's so many different facets about the equality aspect of it. Because I mean, you know, marriage equality, that was one of the biggest first steps that we had as far as like anything sweeping that the United States government has done. But we also need to be able to ensure that we're protecting people's ability to seek employment, you know, regardless of, you know, their sexual orientation. We also need to be able to make sure that along with the opportunities for employment, that we're also getting equal pay. We also need to make sure that we're having proper access to decent health care, because I don't want to make it sound like the LGBTQ community, you know, has like special needs when it comes to it, but there is a section of the community that kind of has special needs, and we have to take that into consideration, and that's the trans community. Mm-hmm. They need proper access to things like that. And I remember back the whole Chelsea Manning thing, hearing how like she had a hard time like getting, you know, well, first of all, she was convicted, you know, by the military courts. But she had a hard time because she was in the middle of transitioning. She had a hard time, like, you know, keeping up with her transitional medications and things like that, and her therapies and things, because the way our system is right now.
That's actually something that Beto covers in his plan, is making sure that transgender people are maintain their rights if they, as far as like who they are, when they if they go into the penal system, that there's no extra prejudice against them. And
Yes.
you know, the transgender movement has really come into the forefront recently, but more so recently. And I love that you mentioned this, but there's been 2 murders of transgender women of color in Texas in the last like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's just mind blowing to me, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. Like why is that? Why would it be that transgender women of color that are getting targeted so hard?
Okay, well, here's a couple of things. I already mentioned about like the I'm just gonna say it, homophobia inside the black community. Now, a lot of times, and we'll be honest with you, when we look at statistics as far as crime and stuff, usually a crime is perpetrated on somebody that looks like you. And when I say somebody looks like you, like it's a white person, versus another white person, a black person versus another black person. Usually it's people that look like you. I'm not, trans women, a little different, but you get the point. Mm-hmm. But the main thing about it is, and there's so many, I don't want to say stigmas, but it kind of feels like that, because the first thing a lot of people think is like, okay, if we want to lump it into like the alternative lifestyle of sexual orientation, people already think that, someone who's not straight is other, is different, is, not the same as them.
That comes a lot in our language too. I'm going to go back to being to teacher mode, or at least something I've learned from being a teacher is I have a lot of little boys who go, "Oh man, that's so gay. You're gay," or all that. Like they throw it around like a slur, and a lot of times I'll pull them out, because that's one of that is a banned word if it is being used in a negative connotation in my room, and I'll step them out in the hallway and I'll tell them, listen, words are bombs. When you use them, they don't just hit the person you're targeting, they hit everybody around you. And what if we have a student in our classroom who is, struggling with coming out, or is being prejudiced against at home? Or what if your friend is actually gay? Do you want your friend to be who they are in front of you, or do you want them to hide that? And they almost always say, well, I want them to be who they are. And they always walk away with, a different perspective. So that stigma comes from various different places and prejudices, I believe.
That's what I love, and what I try to champion as far as kids and young people is the fact how like they're just able to embrace things and go with it, because their mind isn't clouded by a whole bunch of like outside like opinions, and
they get it.
Yeah. But anyway, so like black trans women, actually trans women of color, like have it rough. I want to say, I think I read something either yesterday or earlier today, like as far as reported, there's been so far seven deaths.
Jeez, I didn't know that. I knew about the 2. They were very widely covered.
Now one of the major things about like why trans women of color typically get attacked and or killed, and most of the time, is honestly a lot of people, there's a human reaction to things, and sometimes when you're taken by surprise by something, it could flip a switch that you didn't even know was there inside your brain, and you have a reaction that's just a little too violent for society. Well, violence is there's no standard in society for violence, but you know what I'm saying when I say like a reaction that's too violent for society standards. Mm-hmm. and that's one of them. A lot of times, sometimes people aren't in the right minds, but then there are other people who are like, they're going out and looking to visibly find these people and hurt them. And so there's a lot of different things. But particularly in the black community, the black community is getting a little bit better as far as embracing it. I mean, we've got parents now who are coming to grips that their kids are this way, and parents are starting to understand that it was nothing that they as parents did to have their kids come this way, as well as there was no outside interference for why their kids may have all of a sudden woke up one day and was not straight. Like, chances are they were always not straight, and people didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
All right.
That actually brings us to our next topic, because
Oh, can I jump on one more thing, because this is the other this is the other thing that I feel like is major.
Go for it.
I talked about marriage equality. I talked about job equality. I talked about protecting our trans people. And when I say our trans people, I don't mean just the women. I also mean the men, because there are some people transitioning to become trans men, and they're still looked at differently because they're not at that level to where it's like, oh, that's a man, things like that. But the other one I want to talk about, definitely for sure, is the ability for LGBTQ families to adopt.
I have that on my list. And
oh, you do?
Yes, I do. And
okay,
let me tell you, we will go right into that. Let me tell you what. If you want to adopt a child and you are going to love that child, a child who's been in foster care, or I don't want to say necessarily unwanted, because that's not necessarily true. But if you are willing to adopt a child and you are going to love that child, it shouldn't matter who the fuck you love. 100%. I am all about kids. I teach. My kids are my life. I have a 9-month-old. If something happened to us and Laurent was the only person that could raise him, Laurent would raise him. 100%. I wouldn't think twice. I trust him that much. But you have
thanks for putting that on me. Now I gotta get ready.
Yeah, you're like 4 or 5 on the list. Don't even worry about it. Anyways, but you have so many people who are given the opportunity to adopt children, who adopt them into abusive situations, who don't treat them equally to their own kids, make sure that they know that they're different. And that's so unfortunate to me. If you have somebody who is going to adopt a child and love them, it does not matter who they themselves love, because they're going to show that child love. And that, at the end of the day, is the most important thing. A child doesn't care. They just want to be felt loved. And like I said, I feel very, very passionately about this, and I do not think you should be prejudiced against it. The prejudice that comes towards people who are members of the LGBTQ plus community who are adopting, the prejudice on them is completely religiously based. It's not based in science. It's not based in fact. It's complete and total bullshit. And now you may go, I'm sorry for talking over you.
No, that's okay. A lot of it is insane too, because one of the major things I hear is they're gonna do something to that child. And when I say something, I mean something sexually, like
absurd.
Exactly. It's already been proven. Like the pedophiles and stuff. They're always people who are heterosexual. I mean, when I say always, I mean the vast majority.
Majority. They try to. I mean, obviously, they try to cover it up, and they react in a specific way.
Yeah. But it's even more alarming that like the pedophiles who do something against children of the same gender swear up and down that they're heterosexual. It's mind-boggling. But other things, like, I mean, it's insane. Like they talk about bestiality, as far as like gay couples, having kids.
Which I don't know where they get that from.
I have no idea either. It's just appalling, like the amount of stuff that will get said about a queer couple who wanted to adopt a child. And then to make it even further, sometimes sometimes if a queer couple doesn't want to adopt, but like one fathers or mothers a child and bring them into that relationship, then we've got situations where state and local courts try to take the child away from them. It's insane.
It's ridiculous. I mean, like, to be completely honest with you, as I read through Beto's plan, I'm reading through it and I'm going, I can't believe this is stuff we have to talk about right now. Like, why isn't this is common sense. Like, I don't, and again, I am a straight white man. I am 100% the majority. And it blows my mind that these things are things we're talking about. And like specifically, and the topic I was trying to get to earlier was conversion therapy. Like it's not federally banned. I mean, how are we letting this happen to our children?
I will tell you the number one reason why. It's money.
Mike Pence?
It's money. It's money. Okay, most of these conversion programs are done, on a religious level, and because of the fact that the churches are tax exempt on things like that, but that doesn't mean that the churches being tax exempt, that they don't claim charities, things like that. So you have these wealthy, these affluent people in our communities and stuff that their child doesn't amount to what they thought they wanted it to be, and so they'll turn them over to a church or a camp program that's religiously run and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to bash religion, as I say this, but
I mean, there are very religious people out there who are very good people, but there are also those that use religion as a rallying cry. They weaponize it 100%.
Yeah.
And on they use it when it helps them.
Oh yeah, and so stuff like that. So basically, these programs, the federal government hasn't looked into it enough because there isn't enough of an outcry about it yet. Not saying that there is none. It's just not big enough, and it hasn't gotten to the point where it's rampant. I mean, we get people who harm themselves, who commit suicide because they lived this life, went through one of these programs, came out, and it's almost like 12-step, pretty much, like the moment you fall off the wagon, they're in a moral crisis and they don't know what to do with themselves, and they harm themselves or they wind up harming others. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one of the things that we need somebody on a federal level to look at.
That's part of Beto's plan, like a federal ban on conversion therapy. That's 100% should be a thing. Like how that is not already a thing. Like it's abuse. It's child abuse. Well, like it's telling a child that there is something wrong with them for something like that is child abuse. Plain and simple.
I'm glad you brought the whole child abuse thing, because there's a lot of child abuse going on right now in this country, and it's not just being perpetrated against like LGBT youth. It's not, but that's probably a topic for another.
When you indoctrinate children to be racist and you spread hate to that child, that to me amounts to child abuse.
Yeah.
There's no, children aren't taught to hate. Excuse me, children aren't born hating. They're taught to hate. That's part of Beto's plan is a federal ban on it, which is just common sense. Anyways, like I said, all of this stuff that I read through here is like, I blew my mind that we don't already have it. We're competing with this transgender troop ban, and let me speak on that as well. And you can, as a veteran, you can touch on that as well.
Yeah, I served 6 years in the United States Navy.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your service.
I always have a hard time accepting that. I grew up as an Army brat. My dad was a career soldier, and growing up, I knew I was going to join the military. I knew I wanted to be a soldier just like my dad and stuff like that. By a twist of fate, I wound up in the Navy, which all I can say is, like, if it wasn't for the Navy, you probably would have never met me, Chris. Because if I had joined any other branch, like the Air Force and the Army, like I probably would have stayed in and had a full career, and probably never would have saw like Hampton Roads, Virginia. But anyway,
you'd ended up in Norfolk at some time. At some point. Let's be serious.
You think so?
Oh yeah, it's the biggest naval base on the East Coast.
Well, I mean, that's if I had. Well, I joined the Navy. So, but if I hadn't joined the Navy, chances are I've been somewhere else, like probably on the West Coast. But anyway, where was I?
We were talking about the transgender troop ban, and basically all I had to say about I don't have what it takes to go fight a war. If you have what it takes and you want to defend my rights, then I'm going to stand up and defend your right to choose to do whatever you want to do with your body, with who you are, and be who you want to be. It's common sense.
Yeah, I was in the I started in the military during the heyday of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. As a matter of fact, I joined. And
that's another thing they ended, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, The United States military is one of the biggest fraternal organizations in the world, and the fact that the macho grandstanding of the military kind of like eliminates the idea of people looked at homosexuality as being weak and stuff like that, and you couldn't be weak in Uncle Sam's like armed forces and stuff like that. So that thing ran rampant for a long time, and even though there are a lot of accepting people, even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell happened, there's just some people that just couldn't get it right, that couldn't realize that this guy will have my back at some point. He'll probably pull me out of a fire. He'll probably pull me out of a zone. He'll probably be the one stuffing cotton inside my body to make sure I don't bleed to death before they get me to a medic and stuff like that. Some people just didn't get that though, so there had to be something about that. And also, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was coming right on the heels of the AIDS epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And
which just absolutely ravaged the gay community.
Yes.
It wasn't. I mean, I think the first major person to die from AIDS was Rock Hudson, but specifically Freddie Mercury, which really brought that to the forefront. It didn't mainstream people. I don't mean mainstream isn't a derogatory term, but it would be mainstream in the '80s. It just didn't, and they didn't care. It wasn't them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
sure they cared after Arthur Ashe, though. Arthur Ashe was a tennis player who was straight and had a botched blood transfusion.
Oh, I remember.
He contracted AIDS.
As a matter of fact, that's how I remember. Like the world finally started taking note about the whole AIDS epidemic and HIV and stuff like that. It was after like straight people started like coming down with the affliction. And losing their lives about it. That's when all of a sudden like they want to take note and pay attention to it.
Go watch Dallas Buyers Club.
Oh, wow!
Go watch Dallas Buyers Club.
Amazing movie, by the way. Amazing movie.
Great movie.
But going back to transgender troop band, it's you hit the nail on the head. Like people are willing to lay down their lives for their country, put everything on the line for their country. Some of them have already made the ultimate sacrifice. And it is insane that we have an administration right now that's like, oh, you can't serve. Oh, you can't do this. And it's like, wow, like
their arguments are so garbage too. It's not even they have a good argument. It's just hateful.
As a former serviceman, yeah, there are people in the ranks that may be distracted. It's not enough of a distraction to break ranks and kill morale of a unit. Typically. The way, if you look at how our military is structured right now, we've had generals, we've had admirals coming on saying, "Hey, we don't support this. We don't support this." And when we do find problems within the ranks where somebody is being treated unfair because of their gender or their sexuality, typically the command and the ranks come down on those individuals hard. And I'm talking about the individuals who have the problem, not the individuals who are just being a serviceman and living their lives and trying to do things and make the world a better place, a better and safer place. So I can tell you right now, like this transgender troop ban, it's just another way that the conservative, the GOP and the conservative parties are just throwing red meat at a fearful base and things like that. Mm-hmm. And the main reason why a lot of these people are fearful goes right back to education.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying people are stupid or illiterate or anything like that when I say education.
They just don't pay attention. There's a difference between being stupid and intentionally ignorant.
Yeah, because I've always looked at stupidity as like you're just unable to learn. No matter how many times the lesson is taught, you're just unable to learn. But being uneducated means you're unwilling to pay attention to what you're seeing or understanding what's happening. Understanding that bad terminology right there. But basically, throwing red meat at the base. There's always some person who's always. It's funny how they always say the Democrats. Are triggered when we look if we just say universal health care, freaking the red party goes nuts.
Oh, all over the place.
Yeah, but I've been looking over a lot of Beto's takes on a lot of the LGBTQ equality stuff, and it's some really good stuff, and if it's not a good start, it's a damn good start.
Yeah, no, he, and that's a big thing with him is he's not just like, oh, this is what polls are telling me, this is what I'm seeing on TV. No, he's going out there and he is speaking to people. Like I said, I just saw before I hopped on here, like a month ago, or this month, excuse me, he went and visited Stonewall. Like I don't think anybody else has. He gets out and he meets the people where they are, and I'm going to use this to kind of transition a bit to the debates, because I told you we would talk about them because you asked. And so with the debates, who do you think had the best night of both nights? We're going to talk about both nights.
Okay, so night one, I will say. Oh,
I mean all together.
Oh, all together
of all of the candidates.
I haven't had a chance to get my scorecard together for all 20 candidates that were up there. I can tell you who had some bad nights though. Actually, as a matter of fact, let me see. Let me pull up the actual list of the candidates, and I can tell you who had great nights and who did phenomenal jobs.
Oh no, you got to pull this out of your hat. Who do you think had the best night off the top of your head? Who's the first person that comes to your head?
Senator Kamala Harris.
Okay, I can agree with that. All right, and who do you think faltered?
Who do I think faltered?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Well, for sure, Marianne Williamson faltered.
All right. I think we can all agree that Marianne Williamson is on a different planet, and I went to go to bed last night, and I rolled over and I looked at Hannah, who's my wife, and I said, I need to go to sleep, but I can't stop reading these tweets about Marianne Williamson because they're hilarious. Dude, one of my favorite ones was Pete Buttigieg went to shake Marianne Williamson's hand, but she was already gone. But on her podium or lectern was a small origami crane. Dude,
when she started talking about in the final comments, when she started talking about the power of love is going to beat the GOP, I was sitting there thinking, you remember the Care Bears?
Yes.
You remember the Care Bear stare?
God. Yeah.
That was all that was the first thing that popped in my head. Like,
she's the perfect example of what eating an edible and digesting an edible through a debate looks like.
True.
And you know what? She's going to be in the second debate too, so somebody's obviously donating to her. And I don't mean to disparage her at all through this. It's just really funny, and I think it's funny to that you picked her. I honestly,
she was the bona fide weakest link. She was. There's no way to say it. Now let me see. I'm trying to pull up the list of the candidates, but because she stuck out in my mind as.
Read her Wikipedia page too. I had the. It's so funny.
Do I need to?
Yeah, please. Not right now. Don't do it now, but do it later. If you want my opinion, I as much as I love Beto, I think Kamala Harris the second night came out and she made some really good points, and what her discussion exchange with Joe Biden,
Vice President Biden.
I mean, he wouldn't even look at her, and he lost a little bit of credibility there.
She kidney punched him when she talked about the racial equality portion, when she said that she was one of the little black girls on the bus that were being segregated.
Yep.
Here's what I know for sure. She went for
the jugular.
Yeah, if you want to get your politicians to sit down or sit up and pay attention to you, you talk about something that is an issue for them, but you make sure that you have personal stake in it. Because here's what separates a lot of people.
And that's why Beto's so good. Is he has personal stake and uses those personal stories.
You know what? I do agree with that. I do like that. It seems like, I will say this: Beto is very dialed in to a lot of things that are going on in this country. It really upset me that he did not oust Ted Cruz. It really upset me. But then again,
was so close.
But then again, it's because I have never been a Ted Cruz fan, and I am from Texas.
Ted Cruz is not a Ted Cruz fan.
I grew up in Texas and stuff like that, and I told myself at one point I probably would move back to Texas, but Texas is starting. people don't realize it yet, but Texas is starting to turn purple.
Oh yeah, Beto, and that you can attribute that to Beto
To
O'Rourke,
Beto O'Rourke,
100%.
yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the big things that bugged me was a lot of the candidates talking over each other. It wasn't the who has the best policy or the best points. It's who can talk the loudest.
Yeah, night 2 was definitely different from night 1 because I know this, but I think it's because like the 10 people who were there on night 2 watched how night 1 went, and they're like, this wasn't the debate. This is more of a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
And so night 2, they were like, we're gonna make this a debate. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna answer back to some things that we feel are not acceptable or not right and things like that. And so yeah, it was more passionate. But I do agree, like folks were talking over each other, and sometimes a lot got lost and fell through the cracks and things like that.
Yeah, and I think Beto has a really, really good immigration policy, and when Castro started going in on him, and he didn't even get to tell his policy, he basically, someone who has been to countless detention centers, protested, done all sorts of stuff for those kids. Julian Castro, who I'm talking about, former HUD secretary, he said that he hadn't done his homework. Castro had been to one of those detention centers with Beto O'Rourke. And that just blew my mind. And here's my issue with what Castro was saying. What he said comes off as, we want open borders. If you give anything out that looks like open borders, it's red meat. Mm-hmm. It is chumming the waters for the GOP. And you're going to, the most important thing here is is these swing votes. I'm voting Democrat. You're voting Democrat. I assume you are. I throw you out there. Like we do talk quite a bit.
Yeah. Make no bones about it. As a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and say my political affiliation now. Typically, I'm a Democrat as far as like my voting history and things like that. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, I may shift in the other direction, but that's usually because like what I look at is I look at your qualifications, but I also look at who's making the most sense when they talk. And somebody who's going to turn around and tell me that they're going to run inside people's homes and rip undocumented and take them away from their families and throw them out the door, that's not common sense. Especially when you want to turn around and you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and just say it right now. Pete Buttigieg, he gave the conservative base something to think about because you can't be Christians, but condone unchristian like behavior from the government and expect the government to do it.
Yep, nope, I agree with that. I was on the when Buttigieg first came out, I was a fan, but I've kind of fallen off that because I think he needs to fix South Bend first.
I think so too, and I do admit I'm not sure if he just gave us a good soundbite when he did say when he admitted that he didn't get the job done. I'm not sure if he was just doing that for a soundbite or if he really understood like the gravity of the situation and things like that. But one Buttigieg, it's bad because I'm actually a bisexual man, so technically, you should always stand behind your people, and by people I mean LGBT people, in my case and stuff like that.
Oh, but don't get me wrong, the fact that man was standing on that stage 50 years after Stonewall,
yes,
is an absolute.
It's historic.
It's historic.
It's historic.
Do not take that away from that man.
Oh yeah. I'm not. But what I will say,
no, I didn't say you were. I'm just saying, like in general, don't take that away from him.
Yeah, but what I will say is, when it comes to politics, it's a completely different game. You gotta look at not only if we're gonna look at it for what it is right now, everybody's trying to beat Donald Trump. But yeah,
you can't run on beating Donald Trump. That's not gonna do it. You've got to run on policy, and that is what Beto does, and that's what Beto does best.
Okay, yeah, true. Okay, what I will say though is like you can't just run on beating Donald Trump, but you also if you run on just beating Donald Trump, then people are still going to ask, why the hell is he here? And they're going to be like, we might as well just keep the other guy. It's always the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And that's the way it is. That's the way it's been in politics since I've been alive, as far as I know. Because I'll even admit, like, I've made some votes, on some people that we wound up hating because I just didn't know enough about the other guy that was challenging them.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I think we need to. That was part of the voting rights discussion we had yesterday. Is making sure we have enough education out there about them. But we're gonna go ahead and wind this down. I mean, this conversation has been great. I really thank you for coming on. We got to be really personal about it and talk about our friendship. You know, like me and Laurent go back, you know, almost 11 years. You know, there's a lot of stigma and stuff about you know, how gay men act and all this, that, and the other. Laurent has picked me up from a bar after I've drank too much and took care of me, and we ended up sleeping in the same bed. I never, not one time, ever feared. I knew he'd take care of me. So to anybody who has that, thinks that is a thing that could happen, I'm living proof that you're wrong. So, yeah, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being who you are and all of that stuff. You're great. Like I said, I'm really glad we got to be personal about this. But do you have anything else you want to say? Check out my SoundCloud.
Yes, good. Check out the wait. So what specifically? Because I see right now, like, we've got one handle on here on the cast, but specifically plug your SoundCloud right now.
Oh, I don't have a SoundCloud, but you can.
Oh, I don't have a SoundCloud.
Oh, I know. I'm just messing with you, man. It's funny.
Oh, I mean, I just dropped that hot mixtape out there.
Yep.
Okay, but
you can find it out in the streets, guys. Yeah. But yeah, thanks again for coming on, Laurent. Guys, thanks for listening. This is such a big topic. It's very pertinent right now. The other things I want to tell you right now are to get out, volunteer. Beto needs all of us. We're still trying to get donations, even though that these deadlines are passing. Beto still needs our money.